Welcome to HFYX. What if the most powerful empire in the galaxy didn't lose a war, but erased it before even it began? What if one man strategist, Kael Veyron, chose treason over obedience, not to save humanity, but to save the empire? Because what he discovered about Earth was not a weakness. It was something far more dangerous, something that doesn't fight to win, but fights to make winning meaningless.
The order to invade Earth did not fail. The IT was erased, not delayed, not questioned, not even debated in the usual endless bureaucracy of the Imperial War Corps. It simply vanished, scrubbed from every command chain, every fleet directive, every strategic archive, as if the decision to conquer an entire species had never existed at all. And for exactly 12 seconds, across a war machine that spanned thousands of star systems, something impossible happened: silence. Then the alarms began. They did not sound like warnings. They sounded like something breaking. Admirals shouted across command bridges already preparing for deployment. Navigation corps recalculated phantom routes that no longer had a destination. Entire fleets, engines primed for faster-than-light insertion, stored in synchronized confusion. Somewhere deep within the core, automated systems flagged a paradox. A war that had been approved, funded, and mobilized now had no origin. And at the center of it all stood Strategist Kael Veyron, motionless, exposed, and very aware that every eye in the chamber was turning toward him. He had done it. He had deleted the war. The council chamber did not erupt into chaos the way less assemblies might have. That would have been easier. Instead, the silence returned, thicker this time, heavier, as if even the air understood the weight of what had just happened. 12 council members, each representing a civilization that had conquered entire galaxies before joining the Empire, stared at Kael not with confusion, but with something far worse: expectation. "You interrupted an active campaign," the High Executive said, their voice calm in a way that made it dangerous. "You altered Imperial Command protocols. You erased a sanctioned invasion." A pause. Explain. Kael did not move immediately, not because he feared them, though he should have, but because he was choosing which truth to reveal first. Not all of it. Not yet. If he told them everything now, they wouldn't understand. Worse, they might still proceed, and that would end everything. "The invasion cannot proceed," he said finally, his voice steady enough to hold, though something beneath it threatened to fracture. "Not because we might lose." A faint shift rippled through the chamber. Interest, not disbelief, because the Empire did not fear defeat. Kael met their gaze anyway, because if we engage, we escalate something we do not control. That was new. The High Executive leaned forward slightly, crystalline structure refracting the dim starlight above. "You are suggesting a threat beyond military resistance." "I am stating a certainty," Kael replied. "We are not initiating a war." Another pause. Longer this time. "We are triggering one." Now there was movement, not panic, never panic, but calculation. Several council members exchanged silent data streams. Others accessed historical conflict models in real time. Kael could see it in their posture, in the subtle shifts of their forms. They were searching for precedent. They would not find it. On what basis? Another counselor demanded. "Humanity controls a single system. Their technology is primitive. Their fleet is irrelevant." Kael cut in, more sharply than intended. That alone drew attention. Strategists did not interrupt counselors. Unless the stakes justified it. Kael exhaled slowly, then activated the projection embedded in his gauntlet. The chamber darkened as a field of fragmented data flickered into existence. Battle logs, intercepted transmissions, partial recordings corrupted by unknown variables. Most were classified, some were not supposed to exist. "I have reviewed every encounter we have had with them," Kael said quietly. "Not just the official reports. The discarded ones. The anomalies. The data we flagged as irrelevant because it didn't fit our models." The projection shifted. A brief clip appeared. Grainy. Incomplete. An Imperial boarding unit entering a human vessel. Standard procedure. Controlled environment. Then something went wrong. The footage glitched before the outcome could be seen. Kael did not let it play longer. "They do not behave like any species we have catalogued," he continued. "They do not respond to force the way others do. They do not calculate survival the way we expect." He hesitated. That was a dangerous part. And when they began to lose, he looked up directly at the High Executor. They changed the rules. The chamber remained silent. But this time, it wasn't calm that IT was waiting for the part Kael hadn't said yet, because even now, with fleets halted and an empire watching, one question hung heavier than all the rest. What exactly had he seen that made a man delete a war? And why did he look less like someone who had just committed treason, and more like someone who had just tried to save them all? Kael did not answer immediately. He could feel the weight of their attention pressing down on him, not as individuals, but as something larger, an intelligence forged from conquest, from centuries of certainty that every unknown could be categorized, every resistance measured, every species eventually broken. That belief was the foundation of the empire, and Kael was about to fracture it. Instead of speaking, he expanded the projection. The fragmented clip stabilized just enough to continue. A narrow corridor inside a human vessel came into focus, cramped, inefficient by Imperial standards, lined with exposed wiring and patched metal plates that spoke of improvisation rather than design. The boarding unit advanced in formation, weapons raised, movement precise, controlled, inevitable. They were not expecting resistance. They never did. Standard engagement, one of the counselors murmured, almost dismissively. Primitive vessel. Minimal threat. Kael did not correct them. He let the footage continue. A figure appeared at the far end of the corridor. Human. Male, already wounded. The damage was severe enough that, by Imperial medical assessment, he should have been incapacitated, possibly dead within moments. One arm hung uselessly, the other barely steady as it raised a crude projectile weapon. The boarding unit opened fire. The human did not fall. Instead, he moved forward. Not tactically, not strategically, not even intelligently by any known metric. He simply advanced. The footage flickered as multiple impacts struck him, his body jerking under the force, blood marking each step. And still he closed the distance, firing wildly, shouting something the translation system struggled to interpret. The closest approximation appeared in the corner of the display. Try me. A ripple moved through the chamber. Not fear. Not yet. Disruption. The human collapsed only when the distance was gone, when he had reached them close enough for the device in his hand to activate. The explosion consumed half the corridor in a burst of compressed force and heat. 4 Imperial soldiers vanished from a recording entirely. 2 more dropped, systems failing. The clip ended. Silence followed. Kael let it linger just long enough to become uncomfortable. This is not unusual, a counselor said finally, though their tone had lost its earlier certainty. Desperation responses occur in lower-tier species. Kael nodded once. That is what I believed. He shifted the projection again. Another clip, another corridor, different vessel. This time, a human female. Unarmed, surrounded. The Imperial unit advanced more cautiously now, having reviewed prior engagement data. Their movements adjusted, their tactics refined. They were learning. So was she. The environment changed first. Pressure fluctuations, lighting instability, localized system failures. The humans had triggered internal disruptions, forcing the boarding team to adapt mid-operation. Then she moved, not away, toward them. She used the environment like a weapon. Loose panels, exposed conduits, confined space turned into an advantage rather than a limitation. One soldier fell before they fully understood what was happening. Then another. By the time they subdued her, 2 more were down. The projection froze on her face, bruised, blooded, breathing hard, and still focused. Not afraid. Watching. Calculating. Kael ended the playback. They adapt faster than we're mortal, he said quietly. Not as individuals. As a pattern. He expanded the display again, this time not with footage, but with layered data, combat reports, biological analyses, psychological profiles. Humans possess a chemical response to stress that overrides pain thresholds and suppresses fear responses, he continued. We identified it early. We categorized it as a temporary anomaly. He paused, letting that settle. It is not temporary. The council began processing that immediately, running comparisons, adjusting variables, searching for equivalent traits in known species. There were none. Kael took a step forward, his voice lowering slightly. They do not experience combat as a calculation of survival, he said. They experience it as a decision. That drew attention. A sharper kind this time. What kind of decision? The high executive asked. Kael looked at the projection, at the overlapping data that no longer aligned with any predictive model the Empire had. The kind we're losing, he said slowly, is not an acceptable outcome. A faint shift passed through the chamber again. Not understanding. Not yet, but the beginning of something else. Because for the first time, the Council was no longer analyzing humanity as a weaker species. They were trying to understand why their models kept failing. And Kael still hadn't shown them the part that made him delete the war. He closed the projection halfway, leaving fragments visible, enough to provoke questions, not enough to answer them. Those were isolated engagements, one counselor said, though now it sounded more like a question than a statement. Small-scale encounters. They do not define a species. No, Kael agreed. He met their gaze again. They don't. He let the silence stretch just long enough. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, but what happens next does.
Up to this point, Kael Veyron has shattered the Empire's certainty. He's shown them humans who don't surrender, who fight even when logic says they are dead. A wounded man who walks through gunfire just to take enemies with him. An unarmed woman who turns a broken corridor into a battlefield. But now, Kael is revealing something deeper. This isn't about isolated acts of defiance. It's a pattern, a system. Humanity doesn't just resist, it evolves under pressure. And what comes next? That where things stop being unpredictable and start becoming unstoppable.
The chamber did not move, but the atmosphere shifted. Until now, the Council had been evaluating anomalies, isolated incidents that could be explained, categorized, eventually dismissed. That was how the Empire maintained control. Nothing was allowed to remain undefined. Kael had just removed that certainty. What happens next? The High Executor asked, their tone no longer dismissive, but precise. Kael expanded the projection again. This time, there were no battle clips, only timelines, hundreds of them, layered over one another, each representing a recorded or simulated engagement between human forces and superior opponents. At first glance, they looked inconsistent, even chaotic. Outcomes varied wildly. Variables overlapped without pattern. But Kael isolated one thread, then another, then a third. Slowly, the chaos began to align. In every conflict we have recorded, Kael said, humans begin at a disadvantage. Technological, numerical, environmental. It does not matter. The initial phase is always the same. He highlighted the first segment. Loss. The Council watched as data points confirmed it. High casualty rates, failed defenses, tactical retreats, entire units collapsing under pressure. Predictable, one counselor murmured. They are weaker. Kael did not respond. He advanced the timeline. The next phase emerged. The data changed. Casualties remained high, but the pattern shifted. Human responses began to diverge from expected behavior. Strategies became irregular. Decisions no longer aligned with survival optimization. They stopped trying to win, Kael said quietly. That drew immediate attention. That is illogical, another counselor said. Yes, Kael replied. It is. He zoomed in further. They stop trying to win and start trying to deny victory. The projection fractured into multiple branches, different engagements, different environments, different opponents. And yet, the pattern repeated. When faced with defeat, humans did not disengage. They escalated, not toward victory, toward consequence. They target infrastructure instead of forces, Kael continued. They sacrifice assets to create disproportionate damage. They abandon territory, but make it unusable. They collapse supply chains. They destabilize command structures. He paused. They redefine the battlefield. The Council began running projections in real time, feeding Kael's data into their predictive systems. The results did not stabilize. They spiraled. Impossible, one of them said under their breath. These outcomes violate efficiency thresholds. They violate logic, Kael corrected. He shifted the projection again. Now it showed human history, not as a narrative, but as raw data. Conflict after conflict, war after war, patterns repeating across centuries, entire civilizations rising and collapsing under internal pressure. Weapons developed, then abandoned, then reinvented in new forms. They had destroyed themselves, a counselor observed. Repeatedly. Yes, Kael said, and yet they persist. That was the part the Empire did not understand. Kael highlighted a cluster of data points, moments where human conflict should have resulted in extinction-level collapse. They did not. Instead, something else happened. They adapt, Kael said. Not gradually, not predictably. He zoomed in further. They adapt under pressure. The Council watched as technological advancements accelerated during periods of conflict. Innovations that should have taken centuries emerging in decades. Entire strategic doctrines rewritten mid-war. They use conflict as a catalyst, Kael continued. Every loss becomes data. Every failure becomes instruction. He turned back to them. They do not avoid collapse. He let that sink in. They survive it. A long silence followed. Not disbelief. Processing. Because the implication was becoming clear. If what you are suggesting is accurate, the High Executive said slowly, then engaging them would accelerate this process. Kael nodded once. Yes. And eventually, they stopped losing, Kael finished. The chamber stilled. That was the first moment something close to fear appeared. Not in emotion, but in calculation. The Council ran deeper simulations now, long-term projections instead of isolated engagements. They extended timelines, increased variables, modeled escalation scenarios. Every outcome converged on the same result. Not immediate defeat, but eventual imbalance. A species that did not break. A system that learned faster than it could be suppressed. And then Kael showed them the part he had been holding back. A single projection. A classified simulation run by the Empire's deepest predictive core, never meant to be seen outside strategic command. It depicted a full-scale invasion of Earth. Initial success. Orbital dominance. Surface suppression. Then divergence. Unexpected resistance. Unpredictable escalation. Human adaptation. Expansion beyond defensive parameters. Counteroffensives. Spread. The simulation did not end. It could not. The system had terminated it early. Reason. Outcome exceeded calculable limits. One of the counselors spoke, their voice quieter now. This assumes they survive long enough to adapt. Kael met their gaze. They will. How can you be certain? Kael didn't hesitate. Because they don't measure survival the way we do. He deactivated the projection halfway again, leaving the most critical data unresolved. Another open loop. Another unanswered question. They do not require victory to continue, he said, and they do not require hope. That lingered, heavy, uncomfortable, because hope was a known variable. It could be broken, removed, engineered, but something that did not require it. That was different. Kael turned slightly, as if the next words carried more weight than everything before. There is one more factor, he said. And for the first time since this began, there was hesitation in his voice. Not fear, but caution. Something we didn't understand until it was too late in the simulation. The chamber leaned into that silence, waiting, because whatever came next was the reason he had erased the war, and he still hadn't said it. The hesitation did not go unnoticed. For a strategist of Kael Veyron's standing, uncertainty was not a flaw, it was a signal. The Council recognized it instantly, not as weakness, but as a boundary, a line he had reached and was now deciding whether to cross. That alone altered the gravity of the moment. What factor? The High Executive asked, their voice softer now, but sharper in intent. Kael exhaled slowly. Then he removed the final restriction on the projection. What appeared was not a battle, not a simulation, not even a timeline. It was a pattern. At first glance, it looked like noise, intercepted transmissions, scattered fragments of human communication, signals that had been dismissed as irrelevant during early observation phases, casual speech, cultural artifacts. Unstructured data. The kind of information the Empire ignored. Kael had not. These were collected over a span of 3 of their years, he said. From open channels, unsecured networks, civilian transmissions. None of it classified, none of it strategic. He paused, and none of it random. The Council began parsing the data immediately, filtering for meaning, for structure, for intent. At first, they found nothing. Then the correlations emerged. Repeated phrases, shared concepts, ideas that appeared across different regions, different languages, different contexts, yet carry the same underlying logic. They think the same way, one counselor observed. No, Kael said quietly. They don't. He highlighted a cluster of phrases. We hold the line. Not one step back. If we fall, we take them with us. Make it count. The translation stabilized across multiple dialects, reinforcing pattern. They think differently, Kael corrected. Individually, culturally, strategically. He expanded the projection further, but they align under pressure. That was new. The Empire understood collective behavior, hive species, neural-linked civilizations, unified command structures. Those systems were predictable because they were consistent. Humans were not consistent. And yet, they converge, Kael said. The projection shifted again, now showing conflict scenarios mapped against communication patterns. As pressure increased, as losses mounted, as survival probability decreased, human behavior began to synchronize. Not through command, through instinct. They do not require centralized control to coordinate, Kael continued. They do not require direct communication to adapt collectively. He let that settle. They share intent. A subtle shift passed through the chamber, because that concept did not fit. Intent was not a measurable variable. It could not be quantified, modeled, or predicted with accuracy. And yet, the data was there. When isolated, Kael said, they act unpredictably. He advanced the timeline. When threatened, the data tightened. They begin to act the same. Now the Council understood the implication. A decentralized species that behave like a unified force without the vulnerabilities of one. No single point of failure. No command structure to disrupt. No leadership to eliminate. They become a system, one counselor said slowly. Kael nodded. Yes. And systems can be dismantled. Kael did not respond immediately. Instead, he brought up another layer of data, this one classified. Highly intercepted communications from the edge of human space. Signals that had never been decoded, flagged as low priority due to lack of recognizable structure. Until now, these transmissions were detected before any formal contact, Kael said, before we initiated observation protocols, before they had any confirmed knowledge of us. The projection translated fragments, not clearly, but enough. If they come, we don't wait. Everything becomes a weapon. No rules. The translation broke apart after that, not because of encryption, because the system could not assign meaning fast enough. They were preparing, a counselor said. Yes, Kael replied. For what? Kael looked at them. For us. That shifted the entire frame. Until this moment, the Empire had operated under a single assumption. Humanity was reactive, a developing species responding to external stimuli. That assumption was now unstable. They should not have known we existed, the High Executive said. They didn't, Kael answered. Then how could they prepare? Kael held their gaze. Because they always prepare. The chamber fell into a deeper silence than before. Not confusion. Recognition. A species that planned for threats it had never encountered. A species that built contingencies for unknown enemies. A species that did not need proof to begin preparing for war. That is not strategy, one counselor said. Kael's voice dropped slightly. No, he said. It's instinct. The projection shifted again, this time to something the Empire had never seen from an uncontacted civilization. Infrastructure maps. Hidden beneath planetary surfaces. Buried deep within geological layers. Networks of reinforced structures, energy reserves, manufacturing nodes. Not recent, not new, Old. Decades, in some cases. They have been building for a war they could not confirm, Kael said. Facilities designed to survive planetary bombardment. Production systems capable of operating without surface support. Command networks that do not rely on centralized control. He paused. They expected to be attacked. The implication landed hard, because the Empire's greatest advantage, surprise, was no longer guaranteed. They do not know who we are, the High Executor said slowly, but they know something is coming. Kael nodded, and they have already decided how they will respond. The Council processed that in silence, because it meant the invasion was no longer an introduction. It was a trigger, and Kael had not yet revealed the most dangerous part. He deactivated the projection just enough to leave the final dataset obscured. Another deliberate omission. Another unanswered question. There is a final escalation threshold, he said. The chamber focused instantly, a point at which human behavior changes again. His voice was quieter now, more controlled, not during defeat, not during adaptation, but after. A pause, long enough to build tension. They don't just resist, Kael said. They expand. No one spoke, because the meaning was clear, but the scope was not, and that uncertainty was far more dangerous than anything they had seen so far. Kael looked at them one last time. If we proceed, he said, we are not containing a threat. His voice held steady. We are releasing one. And still, he hadn't told them what happens when humans stop defending and start hunting. No one in the chamber spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because for the first time, the Council did not know which question mattered most. Was humanity dangerous? Yes. Was the invasion still viable? Unclear. But the real question, the one none of them voiced yet, was far more unsettling. Had the war already begun? The answer came before Kael could give it. A signal cut through the chamber without warning, not routed, not announced, not authorized. It simply appeared. Every system in the Council chamber reacted at once. Defensive protocols surged, encryption layers activated, intrusion countermeasures deployed in cascading sequences. The Empire's core network did not get breached. It got bypassed. The projection field flickered, then stabilized. A single transmission replaced everything Kael had shown. No insignia, no origin marker, no identifiable encryption signature. Just a voice. Calm, human. We were wondering how long it would take. The chamber froze, not physically, but cognitively. Every council member shifted focus instantly, redirecting processing capacity toward the anomaly. The Empire did not receive unauthorized transmissions. It dominated communication. This was something else. The voice continued, unhurried. You've been watching us for a while now. We figured you'd either send diplomats or weapons. A brief pause. You chose weapons. Kael didn't move, but something inside him tightened. Because this was not supposed to happen yet. The High Executive spoke, their tone sharp now, controlled. Identify yourself. The response came immediately. No, not defiance, not hostility, just a statement. You don't need names yet. A faint shift of static passed through the transmission, as if multiple signals were overlapping, aligning. But we do need to clarify something. The projection changed, not by Imperial command, by the transmission itself. A star map appeared, not the Empire's, a simplified model, crude by comparison, lacking the layered complexity of Imperial navigation systems. But it was accurate, painfully accurate. The human voice resumed. You're not the first to find us. That drew immediate attention, not from Kael, from the Council. Clarify, one of them demanded. The voice ignored the command. Instead, it zoomed the map outward. Points of light appeared, distant systems, far beyond human space. Then some of them went dark, not destroyed, removed. We've been asking ourselves a question for a long time, the voice continued. Why does everything out there feel empty? A pause. Turns out, it isn't. The implication hit before the words did. Kael closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Too late. You've been expanding for a long time, the voice said. Long enough that we should have seen signs. Signals. debris, something. Another shift in the map. Highlighted vectors, movement patterns. They were there, the voice said, just not obvious. The council began processing that immediately, cross-referencing expansion logs, historical data, lost systems, anomalies that had been dismissed as natural decay or internal collapse. Patterns began to emerge. Patterns they had never connected before. Kael didn't need to look. He already had. And then you found us, the voice said. Not curiosity, not fear, recognition. And everything made sense. The high executor stepped forward slightly. You are implying prior contact with other advanced species. No, the voice replied. We're implying something else entirely. The projection shifted again. This time, it showed Earth, not from orbit, from below, deep below. Subterranean networks Kael had only partially uncovered now rendered in full detail, vast, interconnected, extending far beyond what any external scan had revealed. Manufacturing zones, energy reserves, command structures, all active, all operational. And we started preparing, the voice continued, not because we knew who you were. A faint distortion in the signal, but because we knew what you do. Kael opened his eyes. The council turned toward him, because now they understood. He hadn't been studying humanity. He had been racing them. You intercepted our observation protocols, the high executive said slowly. No, the voice corrected. We noticed them. A subtle difference, a devastating one, and once we knew someone was watching. The map expanded again. This time, the highlighted systems were not near Earth. They were scattered, wide, far-reaching, across Imperial territory. We started watching back. Silence, absolute, because the implication was no longer theoretical. It was immediate. How long? A counselor asked, their voice tight. The answer came without hesitation. Long enough. The projection updated one final time. Red markers appeared, dozens of them, then more, each one representing a location within the Empire. Supply routes, colonial hubs, infrastructure nodes, strategic assets, not guesses, not estimates. Precise. The human voice softened slightly, not in tone. In weight. You thought this was your first move, it said. It wasn't. Kael felt it then. Not fear. Confirmation. Because the one possibility he had hoped was wrong was now undeniable. You don't get to decide when this starts, the voice continued. You only get to decide how far it goes. The high executive's voice cut in, sharper now. This is a threat. No. The human replied, it's a correction. The projection held steady, every red marker pulsing faintly. Alive, active, waiting. You came here to establish control, the voice said, but control doesn't work on us. A pause, just long enough. We don't break the way you expect. And then, the final shift, every red marker expanded outward. Simulated impact ranges, projected damage, cascading failures across entire systems. We don't even fight the way you expect. Kael stepped forward slightly, not to interrupt, but because he understood what was coming next. And if you push this, the voice didn't raise, didn't sharpen, didn't change, but something in it became absolute. We don't stop at winning. The transmission cut. No trace. No signal decay. No exit point. It was simply gone. The chamber remained frozen, not because they didn't understand, but because they did. The war hadn't been prevented. It had been acknowledged, and for the first time in Imperial history, they were not the ones in control of how it would unfold. Kael didn't speak. He didn't need to, because the truth had just revealed itself. Humanity hadn't been waiting to defend. They had been waiting to respond. And now...
This is the moment everything breaks. The Empire thought it was studying humanity, but humanity was studying them back. They mapped their system, infiltrated their structure, and began dismantling their control. Before the war even started, the human voice didn't threaten, it corrected. Every move the Empire makes now feeds into the system. They no longer control. This isn't invade anymore. It's exposure, and Kael realizes the truth too late. Humanity was never preparing to defend. They were preparing to respond, and now the response has begun.
The Empire had just given them a reason to begin. For several long moments after the transmission vanished, no one in the chamber moved, not out of indecision, but because every system, every mind, every layer of Imperial intelligence was now recalculating something it had never been forced to consider before. They were not preparing for invasion anymore. They were trying to understand exposure. How many systems? One counselor asked, their voice measured but tight beneath the surface. No one answered immediately, because the answer was already forming across their internal networks. Too many. The high executive turned toward Kael slowly. You knew. It wasn't an accusation. It was confirmation. Kael didn't deny it. I suspected that they had this level of access. No, Kael's voice lowered slightly. That they would. That distinction mattered, because it meant humanity hadn't just reacted to being observed. They had expanded into the observation itself. Containment protocols, another counselor ordered sharply. Isolate affected systems. Lock down all external transmissions. Initiate counter-surveillance sweeps. It won't matter, Kael said. The interruption landed harder this time. Explain. Kael stepped closer to the central projection, reactivating it, not with human data, but with Imperial infrastructure, supply chains, communication relays, energy distribution networks. All of this is designed for efficiency, he said. Interconnectivity, redundancy, speed. He paused. It's also designed for predictability. The Council saw it instantly, because they had built it that way. That's how they mapped us, Kael continued. Not by breaking in, but by watching how we move. The high executive's form shifted slightly, refracting the projection into sharper focus. They cannot have full penetration. Our systems are layered beyond. They don't need full penetration, Kael said. He highlighted a series of nodes, minor ones. Peripheral. They only need enough. A silence followed. Then the first alert came. Not from the chamber. From the outer network. A supply convoy, mid-route, fully operational, went dark. No distress signal. No damage report. Just absence. The Council registered it instantly, cross-referencing with fleet tracking systems. Signal loss, one Council reported. Possible malfunction. Kael didn't respond. He didn't need to. A second alert followed. Then a third. Different sectors. Different systems. No pattern. At least, none that aligned with known threats. What are they doing? Someone asked. Kael's eyes remained fixed on the projection. They are testing. The high executive turned toward him. Testing what? Kael didn't answer immediately, because the next alert came before he could. This one didn't go dark. It broadcast, across multiple channels, unfiltered, unencrypted. A fragment of audio filled the chamber. Human voices. Multiple. Led. Not a command. Not a warning. A conversation. Route confirmed. Don't hit the main line yet. Take the support chain first. The signal cut. The chamber froze again. Not because of what was said, but because of how it was said. Casual. Controlled. Coordinated. They are not attacking randomly, Kael said quietly. The Council already knew that, but hearing it confirmed made it worse. They are dismantling structure. Another alert. This time, a communication relay. Not destroyed. Hijacked. For exactly 3 seconds. Long enough to transmit a single line. Phase 1 complete. Then it reverted to Imperial control. As if nothing had happened. The high executive's voice sharpened. Trace that signal. Already attempting. No origin point detected. Impossible. No, Kael said. Intentional. The projection shifted again. Not by human interference this time. By Kael. He overlaid the affected systems. The pattern emerged slowly. Not in proximity. Not in strategic value. In function. They are removing flexibility, Kael said. Explain. They are isolating components of our network, not by destroying them, but by limiting their ability to adapt. The Council processed that instantly, because it meant something far more dangerous than direct attack. It meant control, not over territory, over response. They are shaping the battlefield, one counselor said. Kael nodded. Yes. And we haven't even engaged them yet. That was a part that settled deepest, because everything happening now was pre-contact, pre-invasion, pre-war. Another alert, closer this time. An orbital monitoring station near the edge of Imperial space transmitted a final message before going offline. No damage, no breach, just a visual feed. A human vessel, small, insignificant by Imperial standards, drifting, then moving, not fast, not aggressively, just present, watching. The feed cut. They're inside our territory, a counselor said. They've always been inside our territory, Kael replied. That realization spread through the chamber like a fracture, because it meant the Empire hadn't been expanding into unknown space. They had been expanding into observed space, and something had been watching the entire time. The high executives stepped forward again, their voice no longer calm. What is their objective? Kael finally turned away from the projection. They don't have one. That is not possible. It is for them. A pause. They don't fight to achieve a goal, Kael said. They fight to remove yours. Another alert. This time, internal. A secure archive. Access. Not breached. Access. A single file open across multiple systems simultaneously. A simulation. The same one Kael had shown earlier, but altered, extended. Where the Empire's predictive core had terminated, the human version continued, and it didn't end with Earth. It spread, system by system, conflict by conflict, not conquest, destabilization, collapse, adaptation, expansion. The projection cut before completion, not because it failed, because it reached a point where prediction no longer mattered. The chamber stood in silence, not stunned, not confused, understanding. For the first time, the Empire was not facing an enemy that wanted to win. They were facing one that was already changing the conditions of the war itself. And they had done it before the first shot was fired. Kael spoke one final time, his voice steady, but lower than before. This is what I was trying to prevent. No one argued. No one dismissed it, because the invasion had not just been delayed. It had been answered, and somewhere beyond the edges of their control. Humanity was no longer preparing. They were already executing. The only question left was how far they intended to take it. The Empire did not collapse. It tightened. That was its nature. When faced with instability, it did not fracture outward. It compressed inward, reinforcing structure, redistributing authority, locking down variables until the system regained control. Entire sectors shifted into restricted status within minutes. Civilian channels were cut. Military command rerouted through hardened cores. Fleets that had been preparing for expansion were redirected inward, forming defensive grids around critical infrastructure. It was a perfect response. It just wasn't enough. Status. The high executive demanded. 73 confirmed disruptions. A counselor replied immediately. None catastrophic. All controlled. Kael closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Controlled. That was the illusion. They are not trying to break us, he said quietly. The high executive turned toward him. Then what are they doing? Kael opened his eyes again. They are teaching us how to break ourselves. The words settled heavily, because they aligned too well with what was already happening. Every disruption had triggered a response. Every response had required reallocation. Resources shifted. Priorities changed. Systems rerouted. And with every adjustment, the Empire became less efficient, less flexible, more rigid. They're increasing our load, Kael continued, forcing us to compensate faster than we can stabilize. A pause, and eventually, we fail, a counselor finished. Kael didn't nod. He didn't need to. Another alert. This one didn't involve infrastructure. It involved people. A forward command unit, deep within a secured sector, began transmitting unauthorized signals. Not external. Internal. Fragmented reports. Conflicting orders. Tactical inconsistencies. Command integrity compromised. The counselor reported. Possible infiltration. Kael stepped closer to the projection. No, he said. Decentralization. The chamber processed that instantly. The unit hadn't been infiltrated. It had been destabilized. Multiple decision points. No clear hierarchy. Conflicting interpretations of incomplete data. They're removing clarity, Kael said, forcing independent action without coordination. That leads to inefficiency, the High Executive said. Kael's voice dropped slightly. It leads to mistakes. Another alert, then another. Not losses. Not yet. But deviations. Mine at first, then compounding. Fleet movement slightly out of sync. Response times increasing. Communication delays emerging where none should exist. The Empire was still intact, but it was no longer precise, and precision was its greatest strength. What are they waiting for? One counselor asked, the question finally breaking to a controlled structure of the chamber. Kael looked at the projection, at the expanding pattern, at the growing instability. They are not waiting, he said. They are scaling. The next event proved it. A transmission, again unauthorized, cut through multiple command layers simultaneously. But this one was different. It wasn't fragmented. It was deliberate. A single human voice. Clear. Focused. You're adapting, it said. Not mockery. Observation. That's good. The chamber locked onto the signal instantly, attempting trace, origin, containment. All failed. You should keep doing that, the voice continued. It makes this more interesting. The High Executives stepped forward, their voice sharp with controlled authority. You are inside Imperial Command Space. Identify your position immediately. A brief pause. Then, no, the same answer as before. But this time, it carried something else. Certainty. You're still thinking in terms of position, the voice said. Location, territory, control. A faint shift in the projection, subtle, almost imperceptible. You haven't realized it yet. Kael felt it before he saw it. The pattern, completing. You're already inside the battlefield. The words landed, and in that moment, the Empire understood something it had never needed to before. There was no front line, no clear boundary between engagement and preparation, no defined start. The war wasn't approaching. It was already happening. What do you want? The High Executive demanded. The answer came immediately. Nothing. A pause. We don't fight for things. That contradicted every known model, every strategic framework. Then why are you doing this? The voice didn't hesitate. Because you came. Simple, direct, absolute. And now, it continued, you're here. The projection shifted again. Not by Kael, not by the Council, by the pattern itself, the disrupted systems, the altered responses, the shifting infrastructure, all aligning, not randomly, not chaotically, deliberately. They are not attacking targets, Kael said, his voice quieter now. They are shaping outcomes. The chamber watched as the pattern resolved into something unmistakable. A network, not imperial, not human, something in between. A contested structure where every action, every response, fed into a larger system of influence. They've turned our own operations into part of their strategy, a counselor said. Kael nodded once. Yes. And we can't disengage. That was the breaking point, because withdrawal was no longer a reset. It was another variable, another input, another move in a system they did not control. What happens if we continue? The High Executive asked. Kael didn't answer immediately. He didn't want to, but he had to. They escalate. And if we stop? Kael met their gaze. They escalate differently. Silence, not empty, final, because a conclusion was unavoidable. There was no path that did not lead forward, no decision that did not trigger response, no strategy that did not feed into the system humanity had already begun constructing. The voice returned one last time. Softer now, not because it needed to be louder, but because it didn't. You're close, it said, to understanding. A pause. Then, but not close enough to stop it. The signal vanished again, and this time no one tried to trace it, because it no longer mattered where it came from. What mattered was what it meant. Kael looked at the projection one last time, at the system forming around them, at the structure that no longer belonged to the Empire alone. And for the first time since this began, he saw the end, not as a prediction, as an inevitability. "They are not trying to defeat us," he said quietly. The chamber turned toward him. "Then what are they doing?" Kael's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "They are teaching us how this ends." And somewhere beyond their reach, humanity was no longer reacting. They were deciding. The only thing left was what they would decide next. The Empire did not issue another command. For the first time in its recorded existence, the machinery of conquest, vast, relentless, engineered for certainty, paused not because it had been stopped, but because it had reached a condition it could not resolve. Every pathway forward led to escalation. Every attempt to regain control fed the system that was already forming around them. And for the first time, the Empire understood something it had never needed to before. This was not a war it could win. It was a war it could only survive. The High Executor stood motionless at the center of the chamber, the projection still alive with shifting patterns that no longer belonged to Imperial design. Systems stabilized, then destabilized again, not through destruction, but through influence, subtle, persistent, unavoidable. "They've already accounted for every response," one counselor said quietly. No one disagreed, because they could see it. Every defensive maneuver created a new vulnerability. Every lockdown reduced flexibility. Every attempt at isolation made coordination harder. It was not collapse. It was constriction. "They are forcing equilibrium," Kael said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that had not been there before. "Not dominance. Not victory." A pause. Balance. That word settled differently, because balance implied something the Empire had never considered. Coexistence. Not by agreement, by necessity. The High Executive finally spoke again, their voice no longer edged with command, but something closer to recognition. "If we continue—" Kael didn't let them finish. "We lose everything slowly," he said. "And if we withdraw—" Kael met their gaze. "We lose control." Silence followed, not uncertain. Resolved, because for the first time, the Empire was not choosing between victory and defeat. It was choosing between survival and extinction of identity. Another signal appeared. This time, it did not force its way into the chamber. It waited. A single channel. Open. No intrusion. No override. Just present. The High Executive looked at it for a long moment before giving the slightest nod. Accept. The transmission activated. No projection. No map. Just the same voice. Calm. Unchanged. "You've reached the point," it said. No introduction. No pretense. "What point?" the High Executive asked. "The one where you stop asking how to win," the voice replied, "and start asking how to end it." The chamber remained still, because that was exactly where they were. "You initiated contact through force," the voice continued. "We responded in kind. You escalated through control. We responded by removing it." A pause. "We're not interested in destroying you." That statement carried no comfort, only clarity. "But we will," the voice added, just as evenly, "if you leave us no other option." Kael watched the council carefully. No anger, no outrage, only calculation. "What do you want?" the High Executive asked. The answer came without hesitation. "Nothing from you." A subtle shift in tone, but distance. The projection reactivated, this time by Imperial systems, displaying a region of space centered around Earth. A boundary appeared, expanding outward, 50 light-years. "Clear, non-negotiable. You don't enter this space," the voice said. "You don't observe it. You don't interfere with anything inside it." A pause. "And we don't expand into yours." That was the offer. Not peace, not alliance, separation, mutual deterrence. The High Executive studied the boundary for a long moment. "You expect us to accept these terms," they said. "We expect you to understand them," the voice replied. Another pause. because you already know what happens if you don't. No threat, no escalation, just truth. Kael felt it settle through the chamber, because every simulation, every projection, every fragment of data pointed to the same conclusion. Humanity did not need to conquer. They only needed to continue. And continuation was something the Empire could not outlast. "What guarantees do we have?" one counselor asked. The voice answered instantly. "The same ones you've seen." A faint shift. "We finish what gets started." Silence. Then the High Executor straightened slightly, not in defiance, in decision. "Accepted." The word echoed through the chamber, not loudly, but with a finality that reshaped everything. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Empire had not expanded. It had stopped. The transmission lingered for a moment longer. Then the voice spoke one last time. This was the better outcome. A pause, for both of us. And then it was gone. No trace, no signature, nothing left behind except the boundary and the understanding of what it represented. The chamber remained still, not because there was nothing left to do, but because everything had changed. Kael exhaled slowly, the tension that had held him since the beginning finally shifting, not disappearing, but transforming into something else. Recognition. He looked at the boundary one last time, at the space the Empire would never enter, at the species they would never again underestimate. They didn't win, one counselor said quietly. Kael shook his head. No. He turned toward them. They made winning irrelevant. That was the difference, and it was a reason the Empire had survived. Far beyond the chamber, far beyond the reach of Imperial space, human vessels moved in silence, unseen, untracked, unconcerned with the borders they had just drawn. They had not claimed territory. They had defined consequence. And in doing so, they had changed the rules of conflict across the galaxy, not through dominance, not through conquest, but through something far more absolute. They had made it clear that if you threatened humanity, you weren't starting a war. You were choosing how far it would go. And that choice would never belong to you again.
In the end, humanity didn't conquer the empire. They did something far more terrifying. They changed the rules of war itself. They proved that survival isn't about strength, it's about adaptation. That control isn't taking, it's denied. Kael Veyron didn't stop a war. They fight to decide how far the war goes. And once that decision is theirs, no empire, no fleet, no force in the galaxy can ever take it back.